Well, top of the hour, let's continue getting you the war updates. As far as the war in West Asia has now completed 15 days, and in about 2 weeks, we are only looking at further escalation that has now taken place. As Iran has now been retaliating and striking key U.S. assets, as far as the reports suggest that U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, in Iraq, that has now been also targeted. Reports say that the missile has struck a helipad. And there was this helipad that was inside the U.S. Embassy compound that has been hit. There are air raid sirens as well amid this attack being reported. And 2 Iraqi security officials seems to have been struck with this helipad when this missile struck the helipad inside the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. So let's get connected with Srinjoy on this. Srinjoy, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is the latest to come under attack.
Yes, it's very clear that Iran still has drones, it still has missiles, and this one was probably a drone strike, a long-distance drone strike that flew all the way to Baghdad, hit the U.S. Embassy. So if nothing else, properly targeted, you would say. But thankfully, there are no casualties, is what we are hearing. But once again, it is sign that while the drone strength and the missile strength has been considerably degraded, Iran's, that is, they still have drones, they still have missiles, and they can still hit targets like a U.S. embassy in a neighboring capital, like Baghdad in Iraq. So that's another sign that things have to go on for a while, because the Americans had said that the Navy is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, the Air Force is gone, the air defense system and the radars are gone, but the missile capability and the drones still remain. And the fact that this one has hit the Baghdad embassy, the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, is sign that regardless of all the degrading that the Americans have talked about, the Iranians still have some weapons in place.
Absolutely, because Srinjoy, that only talks about, the pictures that have been coming in, seems like it is a sprawling complex. And this is said to be one of the largest U.S. diplomatic facilities in the world that has been repeatedly targeted by rockets and drones in the past by Iran-aligned militias as well. And now this is coming in on part of Iran, which seems to be attacking the U.S. embassy in Baghdad.
Yes, and there have been other attacks too in these last hours or so. So very clearly, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, whether it's in the UAE, even if there have been no casualties, thankfully again, the capability remains, at least to an extent.
All right. So images that are now coming in as far as the missile that seems to have struck a helipad inside the U.S. embassy compound. And those images that are now coming in of this missile attack inside this U.S. embassy compound that has been repeatedly struck. It seems that these are multiple waves of these strikes that has been carried out on part of Iran as part of its Operation True Promise 4. And it seems now been hit because of this missile attack that has been reported inside the U.S. embassy compound in Baghdad. So, Srinjoy, the situation that has been developing, of course, when it comes to the civilian infrastructure, I believe when it comes to these embassies and consulates, counts at civilian infrastructure, them being also repeatedly hit, that means that Iran is working on the directions of the new Supreme Leader, because he's been saying till the time the Gulf countries don't actually take a stand, U.S. bases, military or civilian, will continue to be hit.
Yes, that's the new policy, very clearly, that if you have, and this is a message to the Gulf countries and countries like Iraq, that if you have American infrastructure, American military bases in your territory, then you are liable to be attacked. because two things are happening. First, you're hosting the enemy. You're hosting our enemy, and therefore, that's not something we like. Secondly, when you have American bases there, it's very clear that some of the American missiles are being fired through your territory. For instance, if a plane has taken off from, let's say, Kuwait and hit Iran, then clearly Kuwaiti territory has been used to attack Iran. That is the logic that the Iranians have. And therefore, Kuwait also will be targeted. That's the point Iran has made. So all these Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, of course, but also Qatar, even the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, every country, even Oman, which had tried to bring peace, has been targeted in recent times. So have countries a little distance away, like Turkey, and neighboring countries like Iraq, and also Azerbaijan. So very clearly, a whole lot of countries have been targeted because they have ties with the Americans, or they pump oil. And the idea is to ensure that the oil supply chain is disturbed.
Well, there has been no retaliation, only interceptions on part of these Gulf nations who have also come in a way under attack despite having no, provocation on their part. But this seems to be Iran, which has been continuing with several chapters of its Operation True Promise 4. There are reports suggesting that two security officials, Iraqi security officials, may have also been hit because of this missile that struck a helipad inside the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. And dramatic pictures that are now coming in of this complex, the sprawling embassy complex that is said to be one of the largest U.S. diplomatic facilities in the world. But as far as when it comes to the damages that has now been incurred, there are another report that suggests that 5 U.S. Air Force refueling planes have been damaged in Iranian missile strike at the Saudi Airbase. 5 U.S. Air Force refueling planes were damaged in Iranian missile strike at the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. However, here, no casualties that were reported, but what was being said that the planes are undergoing repairs. And this seems to be a Saudi Air Base now, Srinjoy, that has been also hit. Again, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, oil refineries, a U.S. consulate that we are looking at, and now even when it comes to the the U.S. Air Base in Saudi Arabia, that too has now come under attack. And the significance of these refueling planes, because their very importance only lies when it comes to, as the planes travel for long distance missions like this, they are also a crucial part of the U.S. military.
Yes, undoubtedly. So why do you need a air-to-air refueler? It's like supposing you're flying in a plane, a fighter plane has taken off from, let's say, the Abraham Lincoln. Now, to reach the target in Iran, it may need to be refueled, and to reach the target, strike the target and return back, you need to be refueled. So if you need to be refueled, then you need the air-to-air refuelers. Now these are there. We don't know how many have been damaged. We don't know how many the Americans have in the area. We don't know whether this will affect operations. But surely, if for several refuelers have been damaged, then it's a significant issue for the American forces, for the attacks on Iran to go through.
Because on part of Americans, the way that they have been carrying out as far as the military strikes that are also concerned, President Trump has been of the opinion that largely when it comes to the defense forces of Iran, that has been decimated. Let's in the meantime also talk about another U.S. air base, and this is in Qatar. that has been targeted. And it seems that these are repeated strikes that are now being carried out. This is the Al Udeid Airbase, where, according to news agencies, there have been reports of hearing the sound of several explosions at the Al Udeid Airbase in Qatar. And this too has now come under the attack by the Iranian missiles. So another round as far as US military infrastructure is concerned. Back-to-back updates that have been coming in, Srinjoy, and these are repeated strikes that are being carried out at US military infrastructure.
Yes, Qatar, as you rightly said, Saudi Arabia, and also other areas. Very clearly, the Iranians have arrived at a decision. We will strike anywhere, either America or American allies. We will strike anywhere, wherever there is an option. And these strikes are going through, and you can see that thankfully, perhaps there have been very little loss of life from these attacks, but there has been damage. If you see smoke and all that, then clearly some damage has happened. But thankfully, we are hearing there is very little loss of life so far. At least there have been no announcements of a lot of deaths. So thankfully, there have been very few casualties so far.
Well, because it seems that both sides, in a way, were, anticipating preemptive strikes. And US had already issued advisories, especially when it comes to its military bases, just before the attacks actually began. So advisories that have been, going on. But, it was something that was unprovoked when it comes to civilian infrastructure amidst when it comes to the Gulf nations. That also has now come under attack when it comes to drones and missiles that have been fired from Iran's side. But there are more pictures that are now coming in from Dubai. And this